Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Massar of Bloomberg Business Week on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg TV. I'm here with Chuck Robbins, the CEO and chairman of Cisco Systems. Chuck, great to have you here with us. You know, listening to that last conversation, you and I were talking as we were getting ready, just a reminder of where we were a year ago. There was so much uncertainty. When you look at this year, 2022, how does it feel to you?
Hopeful. First of all, Carol, thanks for having me. I think that we went into 2021 with high expectations, and unfortunately, we came to realize, to your point earlier when we were chatting, when you think we're moving on, we get surprised and realize how little is in our control at the end of the day. But I think this year, we're hopeful that that Omicron is the signal that we're getting close to the end. When you listen to the medical experts, they at least insinuate that may be the case. Obviously, there's a risk of other variants, but I think people are ready, and I think they've been ready, as we all are. And as much as we love this technology and we're so proud of what it's been able to do to keep the world running and keep people productive, I think people are dying to get back and spend time together and be in person.
What do you think in terms of the general macro outlook? How does it feel? You know what we've been talking about. I'm sure you guys have too. You have certainly on some of the earnings calls about supply chain problems and being able to access, all the materials that you need. How does it feel? And does the economy feel like it'll be growing, but maybe not as rapid as we'd like?
Yeah, it's so hard to predict because I think if you go back to March of 2020, most all of us thought that as we went into a global pandemic that the economy would suffer. And we saw just the opposite over the last 2 years. And so there's a couple things I think that are going on. Number one, the year-over-year comparisons will just make it very difficult because 2021 was such a robust year. And then I think obviously the Fed is going to move and begin to raise rates, which will have some impact on the economy as well. But I think that the investment cycle that companies are in the middle of, and how they're thinking about technology investments and how they're thinking about their future, it seems to be a pretty robust investment environment that we see, and particularly in our space, we see some big long-term trends that we think will continue to be tailwinds. We may see some ups and downs because of temporary macro issues, but I think long-term will be fine.
Cost pressures, though, inflation, labor shortages, that's still part of 2022, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, that's true, and as so many of us have said, some of that stuff is going to be transient, but a lot of it's not. I mean, wage inflation doesn't go back. I mean, I joke with our team. I can't remember an employee when things get, when inflation subsides, they come and say, I'd like to get part of my salary back. So, I mean, whatever we're having to do on that front will stay with us forever. But, the good news is that what we've learned around hybrid work and what's possible, where people can live, it gives us the ability to tap into lots of different geographies and hire people where they are, and actually get exposure to much greater talent pools.
Chuck, talk to us about hybrid work. You guys at Cisco have been doing it pre-pandemic, and so have a lot of firms in the technology industry. There is a huge debate out there still, and you guys have certainly seen the benefits of everybody needing to be connected. I'm working at home again for a week or so. Does that continue? Is that with us? Is that one of those long-term trends? It ain't going away.
It's not going away. And I think, we're going to a certain extent, we're going from this great resignation to a great experiment, right? We have, I speak to many of my peers. I was together with 8 or 10 of them yesterday in Washington. And before the session, we spent time saying, well, how are you thinking about it? What are you doing? How are you handling this? But so there's these variations of hybrid work that everybody's trying to embrace. And, we have two aspects. Number one, what are we doing as an organization, but also the technology that we build that's actually enabling our customers to deliver on whatever version of hybrid work they would like to deliver on. But to your point, we had 10 to 15% of our workforce that worked from home 100% of the time before the pandemic. And I think that the way we're approaching it is we're leaving it to the team. So we're not having any sort of mandated return to office policy. We will let the teams know when the offices are open so you can return to them. But as an example, if there's a team of 8 or 10 engineers and they believe that being together in person 2 or 3 days a week is beneficial, they'll make that decision and then they'll choose the days that they want to be in the office together. And we think that's a a better way than just a random, hey, we want everybody in the office 2 days. It's just not all that logical to me, but we'll see how it plays out. And we'll see which of these models actually begins to emerge. But we think the approach we're taking gives flexibility, gives our employees flexibility. Many of them can live wherever they like. Obviously, there's some jobs that are going to be required to in a certain geography, but we think it'll just continue to contribute to the culture that we tried to build.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing Americans and people all over the world kind of being able to move around. I am also curious in terms of innovation. This was one of the things we talked about during the pandemic, and I'm thinking about we're looking at the year ahead in technology. I think there were folks saying, well, wait a minute, would Zoom have been created if we were in a pandemic environment where people weren't together, maybe in a room? What would you say for a company that's been, on hybrid working, for years? What happens to innovation and disruption and being able to figure out new ways of doing things?
I have to say, I was amazed during the pandemic at the level of innovation that we were able to drive and that many companies have been able to drive. That was probably the one question mark that I had. I knew we could be productive because we build the technology, we do it, we use it. So I wasn't all that concerned about that, but I really was worried about how much innovation are we going to be able to drive with our engineering teams, spread apart. And they did an amazing job. And so many companies did an amazing job. And so I think the great news is that government leaders around the world, CEOs, CXOs, all experienced this technology up close and personal in ways that they hadn't in the past. Right? Most CEOs didn't do a lot of video meetings. And now I have my peers who are saying, I can't imagine a world where I take a 12-hour flight for one meeting and then come back. It's just not going to happen. And so I think they realize that this technology has an incredible power. No one expected the world to remain as productive as we were during this time, which says the technology is really powerful. And I think that after having experienced it up close and personal, I think they're much more open to looking at how do we accelerate the use of technology across various aspects of our businesses, which continue to lead to different the need for innovation and creative thinking, which I think is happening at an accelerated pace.
So I meant to say congratulations because I believe this is your 5th year as CEO of Cisco. And I do think, is that right?
Seventh.
Seventh. Oh, forgive me. Okay. So 7. So when you look back at that tenure, and you think about the things that you prioritized or things that you might have said, I'm not sure if that's going to be a big trend. Cloud, you were one of those folks that identified it when maybe some were questioning it. When you look back and then look ahead, what are the things are you most proud about in terms of the time you've been there and those trends that you're like, I wasn't so sure, but it did turn out to be very significant. And then as we look ahead, those things that we are questioning in technology, but that you think we should be paying attention to.
Well, so I think that early on, you mentioned cloud. There was a belief that cloud was going to be the downfall of our company. And I am proud that we embraced it and didn't try to fight it and didn't try to convince our customers that that wasn't the strategy they should employ. We actually embraced it and looked at what does it do to our portfolio? How do we need to evolve our products to actually enable our customers to more effectively use the cloud and SaaS applications and all the things that they're trying to do. So I'm really proud of that. I'm incredibly proud of the team that we had working on this next generation silicon technology that we've been building. And no one really understands this because it's not a consumer product, but our team spent over 5 years building this next generation of silicon that are now powering the internet of the future, as well as the next generation cloud infrastructure at a much lower power consumption than they have in the past. So the ability to deliver higher performance and at the same time help them achieve some sustainability goals and things like that. I'm really proud of what they've accomplished there. I think our teams have, I think the culture that we have really built over the last several years, we've always had a great culture, but I really think it has blossomed. And it's resulted in us being, #1 global workplace 2 years in a row. We're actually #2 this year, but I'm still proud of what the teams have done. And as you look to the future, I think that this year I'm most interested in the human aspect of dealing with this new world that we're going to operate in, because over the last 2 years, that's been one of the biggest things we've had to evolve with our leaders, is thinking about how do you lead people who are now working from home with children that they're going to school in the next room, with elderly parents who are staying with them, who don't have the ability to operate in a normal way that they have in the past. And this was a big challenge that we all had to work through. And I think now, as we get into this hybrid work model, I think the culture, the people, the leadership, how we deal with our employees is going to be actually one of the biggest challenges. I think the technology is actually the easy part.
Well, and what's interesting too, you have been out there in terms of inclusiveness and the power of that, and whether it's connectivity in terms of not just the United States, but the world. And I know you think about this with the infrastructure spending bill that has gotten mired in politics once again. Why is that so important? I mean, from a logical brain, right brain, left brain, I get it, right? Like we should all be connected, but it is really important. It has an impact. It will impact the world in so many different ways.
Well, if you think about it, half the world's population is still not connected, which to all those of us who live on this every day, it's an incredible thing to think about. And if we did drive connectivity, I mean, you could bring 500 million people out of poverty. It's trillions of dollars that could be added to GDP, but that's actually the GDP aspect to me is very secondary. We know that when we connect people, we give them opportunity. And one of the things that we've learned during the pandemic is that we can deliver aspects of healthcare over this technology. We can definitely deliver education over this technology. So if you connect people, give them access to great healthcare, give them access to great education. And the other thing we've learned is that we can actually hire people where they live. We don't have to ask them to move to expensive areas like Silicon Valley. They can work where they live. So we can connect them, give them healthcare, we can educate them, and we can hire them. And this has incredible potential to solve some of the inequality issues, create more inclusivity. And I think not only in the United States, but around the world, it is absolutely critical for us to continue to execute on that. So the broadband investments that are being made in the United States, I think of, like everybody says, it's power, right? You wouldn't think of having a home that didn't have electricity, and we should feel the same way about broadband. And I think it was on display, obviously, during the pandemic with those students who could be educated very effectively over the technology, and those who struggled because they didn't have high-speed bandwidth. And so I'm really pleased to see that that's going to roll out. We've opened a rural broadband center in North Carolina to help all those providers out in a lot of the rural areas understand the technology, the new capabilities, and new ways that you can actually connect. We're working on the UN Broadband Commission to make sure that globally we're helping drive this around the world. But I just think it's core to creating opportunity, and that's what it's all about.
It's interesting when you talk about this inclusive future for all. How do you contrast that, which could have such a huge impact on us globally? As you said, it's not just about GDP, it's so much more in terms of really giving equal access for people and opportunities. So how do you juxtapose that against some of the technologies, Chuck, that we've been talking about, whether it's the metaverse, whether it's all the cryptocurrencies and blockchain? Like, what are your thoughts about some of that stuff? And I mean, are these things, when we look at the year ahead in technology, you think there's just going to be more momentum when it comes to things like that? And it makes sense.
Well,
Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, some of them do. Some of them I'm not an expert on, but I think a lot of them I'm not an expert on. But if you think about the metaverse, I mean, that's a perfect platform through which we can deliver what I was just talking about. I mean, why can't the metaverse be the platform through which we deliver education, we deliver healthcare? So I think that's all going to play out, and I think it's actually probably going to end up being a little different than what we're seeing right now when it's talked about on television. But I think that's super important. I think blockchain is also very important. I'm not a cryptocurrency expert, but I think the distributed ledger can help us in so many ways. And I think there's a huge intersection between some of the technology we build that can actually optimize that ledger, that can actually authenticate and provide security. So I think those technologies will be very important in the future. It's really funny with these emerging technologies. If you think about it, we talk about them for almost a decade before they really take off. I mean, how long have we been talking about blockchain? And
Long time.
I think we're on the verge of it becoming very real. I think we also have other areas we have to focus on, like the ethics of AI that are very important for us to think through. But there's a lot of powerful technology.
What in particular, Chuck, about AI? Is it privacy issues? Is it?
I think there's privacy issues. I think there's the opportunity to drive, unintended bias through AI. And I just think it's important for us from a public-private partnership perspective to actually study and understand and make sure that our students who are being trained in our higher education institutions for technology think about these things as they come out. I think that we need to make sure they feel a responsibility to deliver technology that is actually targeted towards positive solutions. Yeah. Over the years, every technology ultimately is used for both, positive aspects, and then there's always some element of negative use. And I think we need to try to optimize on the positive side.
Chuck, when you look ahead at the year in technology, and I know that's what we've been talking a little bit about, there are lots of things out there. And you talked at the beginning about some of those macro concerns that we faced last year, whether it's supply chains and so on, labor shortages. But there's other things. There's geopolitical tensions. There's the rough relationship, increasingly rough, between China and the United States. And that is still a big market for everybody, China. We know that. The opportunities are there. The regulatory oversight of technology. What are some of is there one or two that you say, if you're a tech CEO, a tech leader, you need to be really watching out for this? And there may be something I didn't mention.
Well, I think that, look, the resilience in the supply chain and the capacity of components, and it's not just semiconductors, it's power supplies, it's substrates, all of these things. We just need more capacity, and we need more geographic diversity. What we learned during the pandemic is in our supply chain, we have always had regional diversity. So we would have, in case of a natural disaster like a tsunami in a certain area, we would have the ability to move to another part, perhaps in the same country. What we had never prepared for is an entire country shutting down.
Yeah.
And so I think it's highlighted the need for us to really think about resilience in the supply chain, and redundancy and capacity of components and geographic diversity, I think, is a very important one. I think for CEOs, we joke that so many of the things that we've had to deal with over the last 5 or 6 years just were never on our minds when we took these jobs, right? Whether it's tariffs or it's pandemics, it's being
cybersecurity.
Cyber we kind of expected, but it's actually on steroids. I mean, there's $5 trillion at risk over the next 5 years from cybersecurity. You have, the social justice issues that we're being asked to chime in on. You've got the geopolitical tensions that are happening, and so all of those things make these jobs much more complicated. And they're things that are somewhat out of your control that you just have to be ready to deal with and build lots of scenarios for them, honestly. But on the topic of China and the U.S., I think it's super important for us to find a way to coexist. We're going to compete, I know that, and we have different thoughts about, how the U.S. government versus the Chinese government. But I think for the global economy and frankly for the world, I think it's important for us to come to some common ground on how we can coexist. And I'm hopeful that the administration will continue to take that approach going forward.
If there's one thing that, I know this is so trite, I feel like, and you probably asked it a million times, but the one thing that keeps you up at night, because I do think about, like you said, that's a full plate. That's a buffet of things, right? That, as you said, as leaders, who could have thought? There's no playbook. None of us had the playbook. Just got about a minute or so left here. Is there one thing that you think, this is front and center? Every day I get up, I think about this.
Well, it's not the same thing all the time. So right now it's generally around supply chain. But I think at a higher level, what I would say is you spend time thinking and maybe worrying about those things that you can control, and then you spend time doing scenario planning around those things that you cannot. So you can be prepared for things that may happen. There's always going to be the surprise. But I think just spending time on the things that you can control is most important. And but I'd say most CEOs today, I'm not sure we worry a lot. I think we think a lot. about things that are going on. And I'd say the most critical area is supply chain.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. Chuck, thank you so much for your time and for being
Thanks,
part
Carol.
of our event. Yeah, be well. Chuck Robbins.
Always great to see you. Thank you.
Same here. Be well. Take care.